America was not born peacefully. It was torn into existence. Before skyscrapers, highways, and quiet suburban streets, this land learned violence the hard way. During the Civil War, entire fields became slaughterhouses, not for hours, for days. Men did not die quickly. They screamed, bled, prayed, and waited. And when the war finally ended, something stayed behind. The battlefields went quiet. But they never became empty. Places like Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, and Chickamauga were never meant to be forgotten. Tens of thousands of soldiers fell where they stood, many buried where they died, others never identified, never claimed. The soil absorbed blood until it could absorb no more. Trees were shredded by cannon fire. Rivers ran dark. And for the first time in American history, death came in numbers too large to understand. Today, tourists walk these fields under blue skies. Families take photos. Children run across grass that once shook with artillery. But beneath every step lies history that refuses to stay silent. Veterans who returned after the war said something felt wrong. Horses refused to cross certain road. Dogs barked at empty air. Campfires blew out without wind. Soldiers who had survived combat swore they could still hear drums at night slow, steady, marching drums long after the armies were gone. At Gettysburg, the dead were not removed immediately. Bodies lay where they fell for weeks. The smell was unbearable. Local civilians described hearing moaning long after all wounded had been accounted for. Some claimed the cries came from beneath the ground itself. Doctors dismissed it as trauma. But trauma doesn't leave footprints. One farmer near the battlefield reported seeing lanterns moving across the field at night, drifting low to the ground. When he followed them, the lights vanished and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. His crops failed that year. Every year after, nothing grew in that exact path. Historians call it coincidence. The land disagrees. At Antietam, the bloodiest single-day battle in American history, over 22,000 men were killed or wounded in less than 12 hours. Survivors wrote about something worse than combat the silence afterward, a silence so heavy it felt alive. Men refused to sleep. Some claimed the shadows between corn stalks moved against the moonlight. Decades later, park rangers reported the same thing. Voices drifting through the fields. Commands shouted in accents long gone. Gunfire with no source. Sound engineers tested the area. No explanation. Then there are the apparitions. Civil War reenactors have reported seeing soldiers not part of any unit uniforms wrong, faces pale, eyes unfocused. When approached, these figures dissolve, leaving behind only the smell of sulfur and damp earth. One reenactor fainted after locking eyes with a Confederate soldier who appeared to be missing half his face. When he woke up, he was screaming. The most unsettling part? Many witnesses report feeling observed, not threatened, not attacked, studied, as if something beneath the battlefield is aware of the living and curious about why they returned. Paranormal researchers believe these battlefields don't function like haunted houses. There is no single spirit, no single story. Instead, they believe the land itself became a container. Fear, pain, desperation, hope, all compressed into one place. A mass grave of emotion. Modern equipment behaves strangely here. GPS units malfunction. Cameras fail. Batteries drain in minutes. Compasses spin wildly, especially near known burial pits. And when night falls, even experienced investigators admit something changes. One researcher described it simply. It doesn't feel like the dead are trapped here. It feels like we're visiting something that never stopped. This is not folklore. This is not exaggeration. These battlefields are protected land not just for history, but because excavation repeatedly revealed remains long after records said none existed. Bones surfaced after storms. Buttons, bullets, personal items worked their way up through the soil like the ground itself was remembering. America calls these places sacred, but sacred does not mean peaceful. Because when a nation learns how to kill its own people, something is left behind, something that doesn't understand peace. And that something still walks the fields at night. If there is one place in America where the past refuses to stay buried, it is Gettysburg. By daylight, the battlefield feels calm, almost gentle. Rolling hills, stone walls, open fields that look harmless under the sun. But the moment night settles in, something shifts. Rangers who have worked there for decades say the land changes personality. It grows watchful, as if it recognizes when it is no longer being observed and begins observing instead. The first official reports didn't come from paranormal investigators. They came from park rangers, trained professionals with no interest in ghost stories. Men and women assigned to night patrols began reporting the same incidents independently, years apart. Footsteps matching their pace. Voices calling commands from empty fields. The smell of gunpowder drifting through the air when no reenactments were taking place. One ranger, stationed near Devil's Den, described seeing a line of soldiers moving silently through the trees. He assumed they were reenactors until he realized there was no event scheduled. As he approached, the figures didn't acknowledge him. They marched straight through a boulder and vanished. He didn't file a report that night. But months later, another ranger described the exact same formation, same location, same uniforms, same silence. Gettysburg's most haunted areas are not the monuments, they are the spaces between them. The gaps where nothing was officially recorded. Fields where soldiers died before anyone knew their names. Ravines filled hastily with bodies to prevent disease. Places where no one stayed long enough to remember, except the land itself. At Pickett's charge, visitors report hearing screams carried by the wind. Not loud, not traumatic, desperate, ragged, as if the sound itself is exhausted. Audio equipment has captured these cries on clear nights with no background noise. Experts reviewed the recordings. No animals, no human sources, no explanation. Then there are the soldiers who interact. Several tourists have reported being approached by men in Civil War uniforms, offering directions, water, or medical help. The soldiers appear confused, sometimes wounded. One woman said a man with a blood-soaked sleeve warned her not to go further into the field because they were about to fire again. When she turned to thank him, he was gone. Moments later, cannon fire echoed across the hills. No cannons were present. The most chilling incident occurred in the early 2000s during a late-night documentary shoot. Cameras were set up near a known mass grave site. As the crew reviewed footage, they noticed movement behind the tree line, shapes forming, dissolving, reforming. Then the audio track captured something worse. Commands. Clear military orders shouted in unison. Hold the line. Advance. Fire. The crew fled. When they reviewed the footage later, one voice stood out, closer than the others, almost whispering directly into the microphone. "You're standing where we fell." Historians often describe Gettysburg as the moment America changed forever. After that battle, death was no longer distant. It was personal. Brothers fought brothers. Neighbors killed neighbors. And many died believing they had failed their cause, their families, their country. That belief didn't die with them. Psychologists who have studied battlefield hauntings suggest that intense emotional trauma can imprint on physical locations, not as individual ghosts, but as repeating experiences, echoes that don't know they're over. Gettysburg may not be haunted by soldiers who don't want to leave, but by moments that never ended. This explains why visitors feel sudden panic for no reason, why some feel overwhelming guilt, why others break down crying without understanding why. They're not being attacked. They're being remembered. The climax of Gettysburg's hauntings comes just before dawn. Multiple witnesses have described seeing full-scale formations appear briefly in the fog, lines of soldiers standing exactly where historical maps say they stood during the battle. No movement, no sound, just presence. Then, as the sun rises, they fade, leaving silence behind. But silence doesn't mean peace, because Gettysburg is only one battlefield. And what happened there happened again, and again, across the nation. Each time, the land learned something new. And next, we go somewhere even bloodier. A place where the ground itself still refuses to grow crops. A place where the dead don't march. They wander. If Gettysburg is where America broke, Antietam is where it bled out. September 17th, 1862. Less than 12 hours. Over 22,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. The cornfield at Antietam changed hands multiple times in a single morning. Men advanced into gunfire knowing they would not survive. Entire regiments vanished before noon. Survivors later said the corn was cut down so violently it looked harvested by rage itself. By sunset, the field was silent, except it wasn't. Locals reported hearing gunfire long after the battle ended. Not echoes, not imagination. Full volleys, organized, relentless, as if the battle was repeating itself somewhere just out of sight. Decades later, the reports didn't stop. Park rangers working dawn patrol described mist forming unnaturally low over the cornfield. Shapes moved inside it, crouching, rising, collapsing. One ranger claimed he heard someone beg for water directly behind him. When he turned, there was no one there. But his canteen was empty. Visitors experience Antietam differently than Gettysburg. At Gettysburg, people feel watched. At Antietam, they feel needed. Many report a sudden urge to help someone, to kneel, to search, to call out, even though the field is empty. Psychologists suggest empathy. Investigators suggest something far older. One woman collapsed near Bloody Lane, sobbing uncontrollably. She later said she felt hands grabbing at her dress, pulling, pleading. Her legs were bruised. No one had touched her. Bloody Lane is one of the most active sites in the park. Thousands of Confederates died there in a trench that became a grave. Visitors hear whispers rising from the ground, overlapping voices speaking at once. Some sound calm. Others sound panicked. One EV recording captured a phrase repeated 3 times. "Don't leave us here." At night, the atmosphere changes dramatically. The temperature drops without explanation. Sounds become distorted. Footsteps echo where no paths exist. One investigator reported seeing a man kneeling in the lane, clutching his stomach. When approached, the figure looked up, eyes wide, mouth open, and vanished. That investigator quit fieldwork permanently. Antietam is also known for its residual suffering. Not ghosts that interact, but moments frozen in time. Visitors hear screams that cut off abruptly, shouts of medic, that echo and vanish. The same cries, night after night, from the same locations. And then there are the children. Several families have reported their children speaking to soldiers no one else can see. Descriptions are consistent. Muddy uniforms, sad faces, injuries. One child asked his mother why the men can't go home. Another said, "They don't know the war is over." Historians argue trauma explains this. But trauma doesn't explain why multiple children, years apart, describe the same wounds. The climax of Antietam's hauntings is the bridge now known as Burnside Bridge. Visitors report intense pressure there. Chest tightness, dizziness, nausea. Some feel compelled to step into the water. Investigators believe the river absorbed more than blood. It absorbed final thoughts, final fears, final regrets. Antietam doesn't scare people away. It pulls them in. Because unlike Gettysburg, where soldiers still march, at Antietam, many are still dying. Every night. In the same places. In the same way. And when the fog rolls in just right, witnesses swear they see bodies lining the fields again, rising, falling, reaching, trapped in a moment America would rather forget, but Antietam remembers. And it is not finished, because further south, the war took an even darker turn. A place where the dead don't beg, they warn. Shiloh was not meant to be a battlefield. It was a quiet Tennessee forest, thick trees, soft ground, a place where sound carried strangely and visibility failed without warning. When the fighting began in April 1862, soldiers were swallowed by the woods. Units became lost within minutes. Orders vanished into the trees, and death arrived from every direction at once. By the end of 2 days, over 23,000 men were dead or wounded. But what made Shiloh different was not the number. It was the way the men died. Gunshots echoed endlessly through the forest, bouncing, multiplying, confusing. Wounded soldiers crawled into ravines and underbrush, where they lay hidden, bleeding, crying for help that never came. When rain fell, it filled trenches with water, drowning men who could no longer move. Survivors later wrote about hearing screams all night, not fading, not weakening. Screams that lasted until morning. Locals said the forest never sounded the same again. Modern visitors report hearing shouting deep among the trees, voices that don't echo correctly. Whispers rise from the ground. Some describe hearing their names spoken in unfamiliar accents. Others say the forest feels crowded, even when they are completely alone. Rangers report animals refusing to enter certain areas. Birds fall silent without warning. Wind dies abruptly, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. The most haunted area of Shiloh is known as the Hornet's Nest. The name came from the sound of bullets, a constant, maddening buzzing. Soldiers died there by the thousands. Today, visitors experience sudden ringing in the ears, followed by intense anxiety. Some claim the ringing turns into voices, overlapping, arguing, screaming. One investigator reported hearing a man shout, "They're all around us," immediately followed by gunfire. The sound was so loud it knocked him to the ground. No weapons were present. Shiloh is also known for shadow movement. Figures dart between trees. Shapes crouch behind trunks. When followed, they disappear just out of reach. Motion cameras trigger repeatedly in empty forest. Footage often shows shadows moving against the direction of the moonlight. Then there is the Shiloh whisper. Multiple witnesses report hearing a low, steady murmur rising from the forest floor at night. Not individual voices, a collective sound, like hundreds of people speaking at once, just below comprehension. Linguists analyzing recordings could not identify the language. They did identify emotion, fear. The climax of Shiloh's hauntings occurs after heavy rain. Water seeps through the soil, releasing the smell of iron and decay. Visitors report seeing wounded soldiers crawling again, reaching out, mouths open but soundless. One ranger described watching a man pull himself across the ground, only to sink into the earth and vanish. Shiloh doesn't replay the battle. It replays the suffering. There are no formations, no marching lines, only confusion, pain, and the overwhelming sensation that the forest is alive, not with spirits, but with memory. Shiloh does not want attention. It wants silence. And when silence breaks, the screams return. Because Shiloh taught America something terrible, that death does not need open fields. It can hide. It can wait. And further south, waiting became something worse. Because the next battlefield did not forget how to fight. It learned how to trap. If Shiloh was confusion, Chickamauga was entrapment. The battle took place in September 1863, across dense woods and winding trails along Chickamauga Creek. Visibility was poor. Maps were unreliable. Units became separated within minutes. Men walked in circles without realizing it. Officers gave orders that led directly into enemy fire. Entire regiments vanished into the trees and were never reassembled. Survivors later described the land as wrong. Paths seemed to change. Landmarks disappeared. Sounds came from the wrong direction. When the fighting ended, over 34,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing. But Chickamauga did not release them. Modern visitors report an overwhelming sense of disorientation. Compasses spin, GPS signals fail, trails feel longer than they should be. People report walking for hours only to end up where they started. Some feel sudden panic, as if they are being herded. Park rangers receive frequent calls from hikers who are not lost, but feel lost. One ranger described following a man's cries for help deep into the woods, only for the voice to lead him in circles. When the ranger stopped responding, the voice stopped too. Then there is the phenomenon locals call the marching loop. At night, witnesses hear footsteps moving in formation through the woods. Boots on dirt, equipment clinking, low murmured commands. The sound approaches, passes, and then returns, again and again, as if the unit cannot find its way out. Thermal cameras have captured clusters of heat moving through cold forest, maintaining formation before dispersing suddenly. No bodies, no animals, just organized motion. The most disturbing encounters occur near Snodgrass Hill, where the fighting was fiercest. Visitors report seeing soldiers standing still between the trees, watching, not attacking, not moving, just observing. When approached, they fade backward into the forest, never turning their backs. One investigator claimed a figure stepped directly into his path and whispered, "You're going the wrong way." Moments later, the trail vanished. Chickamauga is also infamous for its post-battle suffering. Thousands of wounded lay unattended for days. Water sources were contaminated with blood. Men drank anyway. Many died alone, delirious, convinced they were still marching. Today, visitors report hearing coughing, groaning, and weak cries near the creek. Some feel hands brush their legs in shallow water. One woman collapsed after feeling someone grip her ankle beneath the surface. No one was there. The climax of Chickamauga's hauntings comes at dusk. As light fades, shadows lengthen unnaturally. The woods seem to close in. Visitors feel pressure behind them, as if something is urging them forward. Rangers warn hikers to leave before sunset, not because of wildlife, but because people stop listening. And when you stop listening at Chickamauga, you stop finding your way out. Because Chickamauga doesn't replay a moment. It enforces it. It traps. It confuses. It keeps moving. And those who wander too long begin to feel something terrifying. The land doesn't want you dead. It wants you lost. And deeper into the south, loss turned into something even darker, because the next battlefield didn't just trap soldiers. It broke them. Cold Harbor is not a place for the faint of heart. June 1864, Virginia. Union soldiers prepared to storm entrenched Confederate lines in a battle that would leave over 12,000 dead in under 12 hours. Orders were absolute. Advance, no hesitation, no retreat. Those who survived the first volley faced another, then another, and when the day ended, thousands lay where they fell, bodies entangled, scattered, uncounted for hours. Today, Cold Harbor is quiet in the sun. Grass covers the trenches, and historical markers dot the field. Tourists walk the paths, unaware that beneath their feet, the earth remembers every scream, every step, every futile attempt to survive. But those who venture there at night discover the battlefield's darker side. Rangers report hearing volleys echoing across the open fields when no reenactments are scheduled. The sound is precise. Musket fire, cannon booms, shouts of officers. It comes from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the ground in ways that make direction impossible. Visitors describe the feeling of being watched constantly. Shadows flit across their peripheral vision. Figures appear at the edge of fields. Uniformed men standing at attention, rifles in hand, faces pale and silent. Approach them, and they vanish like mist. Some hear whispers from the trenches themselves. Names, pleas, commands. One researcher, standing near a deep foxhole, recorded an EVP in which a soldier shouted, "Stay down. Stay down or they'll take you." The chilling thing? The foxhole was empty. And yet, when the playback was slowed, faint footsteps could be heard climbing over dirt and rocks, matching the rhythm of someone trying desperately to escape. Cold Harbor's most active haunt is near the Widow's Walk, a ridge overlooking the battlefield. Witnesses report that as dusk falls, the air grows dense. Temperature drops sharply. The scent of gunpowder mixes with iron and earth. Those who linger too long feel sudden weakness, nausea, or vertigo, as if the earth itself is pulling them into the past. One night, a pair of paranormal investigators set up cameras to capture residual energy. Halfway through their session, a shadowy figure stepped into view. It was a soldier, leaning against a tree, motionless. As they watched, it slowly raised its hand, as if signaling surrender. Moments later, it disappeared, leaving behind a faint impression in the dirt, boot prints leading to nowhere. Cold Harbor doesn't replay the battle. It replays the inevitability of death. Men weren't just killed here. They were trapped in hopelessness. And that hopelessness still lingers, a palpable energy that presses down on anyone who walks the fields after dark. The climax of Cold Harbor's hauntings comes when multiple echoes converge. Visitors hear commands, cries, and musket fire overlapping in perfect chaos. Shadows march along the tree line. Figures kneel in the trenches, staring at the living as if questioning why they are still alive. Some who venture too close report hearing a voice whisper directly into their ear, "You shouldn't have come." Those who leave often report nightmares of endless lines of men advancing into fire. Some wake with dirt under their fingernails, scratches on their arms, or the smell of smoke lingering on their clothes. Cold Harbor teaches a terrifying lesson. Not all ghosts linger because they can't leave. Some linger because the land itself refuses to forget the violence it has witnessed. And further south, the war did something worse still. A place where the dead didn't just linger. They learned to move. Petersburg is not remembered for a single battle. It is remembered for 10 months of unrelenting agony. Trenches stretching for miles. Starvation, disease, the constant, deafening thrum of artillery. Soldiers were trapped underground, in tunnels and dugouts, waiting for orders that often never came. Many starved, many froze, many vanished into the endless lines of earthworks, never to be seen again. And the land never let them go. Even today, visitors report a persistent feeling of unease as they walk the preserved lines. The earth underfoot seems softer, almost pliable, like it remembers each step. At night, fog rolls over the trenches in unnatural patterns, thickening in spots where the dead were concentrated. Shadows shift along the walls of the earthworks, and faint, urgent whispers echo through the corridors. Some of the most intense hauntings occur in the Confederate tunnel networks beneath the lines. Park guides warn against wandering there alone. Yet paranormal investigators report hearing digging, muffled sobs, and distant footsteps that move in perfect coordination, as if entire units are patrolling, still bound by duty. One investigator described the experience. "I was walking along a trench when I felt something brush past me. I turned, and there was nothing. But the air behind me, it felt alive, like it was breathing." Other visitors have reported seeing figures leaning over the trench walls, clutching rifles, mouths open in silent screams. When approached, these soldiers vanish. Cameras often capture flashes of uniforms, sometimes torn and bloody, sometimes pristine, as though time has fractured itself here. The most harrowing reports come from the sunken road, men under relentless fire. Witnesses describe seeing the same man over and over, climbing out of the earth, stumbling, falling, then climbing again. Some say he carries a tattered flag. Others claim he mouths words that can't be understood. Footage often shows only a blur of movement, yet those present swear they saw his face, pale and hollow. At night, the battlefield plays tricks on the senses. Voices call names in American accents from both sides, overlapping in chaos. The smell of gunpowder mixes with decay, and sudden cold spots appear unpredictably. One ranger reported hearing a wounded man gasp for water, yet when she looked, the trench was empty. The gasp repeated for several minutes before fading into the wind. Petersburg doesn't just haunt visitors. It traps their senses. The smell of smoke lingers days after leaving. Some report nightmares of marching endlessly through trenches, firing rifles, yet never hitting anyone. Others describe waking with hands scratched, as if trying to pull themselves from the mud that still holds the dead. The climax of Petersburg's hauntings is subtle but powerful. At midnight, when fog is thickest, figures can be seen moving along the trenches, lines of men who do not realize the war has ended. They whisper, stumble, and climb over each other in slow, agonized motion. Occasionally, a single figure breaks formation, reaching toward the living, fading as suddenly as it appeared. This is a battlefield where death did not merely linger. It taught the land how to remember suffering. And for those who think the horrors of war stopped at Petersburg, history offers a warning. Because farther west, another battlefield waits, one where the earth itself seems to pulse with every life taken, where the dead didn't just march, didn't just linger. They stalked. If Petersburg was slow suffering, Franklin was instant slaughter. On November 30th, 1864, the Battle of Franklin unfolded with terrifying speed. In less than 5 hours, nearly 10,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing. Confederate soldiers charged headfirst into fortified Union positions, advancing across open fields under relentless gunfire. Bodies piled so high that living soldiers used them as cover. By nightfall, the ground was soaked in blood, so much that witnesses later said it ran like streams through the fields. And when the shooting stopped, something else began. Locals say Franklin never truly grew quiet again. Visitors walking the battlefield after sunset report hearing boots striking frozen ground in perfect rhythm. The sound grows louder, closer, yet no one is ever there. Motion sensors trigger without cause. Flashlights flicker. The air suddenly becomes thick, heavy, as if the night itself is watching. One of the most haunted locations is the Carter House, which stood at the center of the fighting. Its walls were riddled with bullets, more than 1,000 holes, and its backyard became a makeshift morgue. Today, those walls still bleed history. Guests report seeing men in tattered uniforms standing in doorways, faces expressionless, eyes hollow. Some witnesses claim these figures look confused, as if they don't understand why the battle hasn't ended. Others hear desperate knocking from inside locked rooms, slow, deliberate knocks that stop the moment someone responds. The backyard is worse. Paranormal investigators have recorded voices whispering, "Hold the line," and "Charge," over and over again. EVPs capture anguished cries for help, followed by sudden silence. Dogs refuse to enter the yard, pulling away and whimpering as though sensing something unseen. The most chilling phenomenon occurs near the Cotton Gin, where hundreds fell in minutes. Witnesses describe seeing soldiers rise from the ground, not fully formed, more like silhouettes stitched together from fog and moonlight. They march forward, then collapse, only to rise again, repeating the final moments of their lives. This cycle never ends. A former park ranger recounted an incident that still haunts him. While closing the grounds one evening, he heard a man whisper directly behind him, "We didn't make it." When he turned, a shadow figure stood inches away, its face half-formed, eyes dark hollows. The ranger fled, refusing to work night shifts ever again. Franklin doesn't just replay the battle. It relives the panic. Visitors often leave with unexplained bruises, scratches, or the overwhelming feeling of being pushed. Some wake up later with vivid dreams of charging across open fields, hearing gunfire, knowing they will die, and being unable to stop. The climax of Franklin's haunting comes in the early hours before dawn. Fog rolls across the battlefield, thick and low. Shadows begin to move against it, dozens, sometimes hundreds. They advance silently, rifles raised, faces locked in terror and determination. Then, without warning, the fog collapses inward, and everything vanishes. No sound, no movement. Only silence heavy enough to crush the chest. Franklin is not a place where ghosts wander. It is a place where they are still fighting. And as terrifying as Franklin is, there exists a battlefield so soaked in death that even veterans of paranormal research refuse to return. A place where the river itself whispers names. And the dead don't march. They drag you with them. Franklin showed us men who refused to stop fighting. But Antietam shows us something worse. On September 17, 1862, near Sharpsburg, Maryland, the Battle of Antietam became the bloodiest single day in American history. In just 12 hours, over 23,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. The dead lay so thick across the land that survivors struggled to walk without stepping on bodies. The earth drank more blood in one day than most places absorb in a lifetime, and it never gave it back. The battle stretched across farms, fields, woods, and finally toward Antietam Creek. Soldiers bled where they fell. Some crawled toward the water, desperate to drink, only to collapse inches from the bank. By sunset, the creek itself ran dark. Witnesses later said it looked as if the river had turned alive and angry. Today, people claim the river remembers. Visitors walking near Antietam Creek report hearing voices carried by the water. Faint, broken whispers calling out names, not commands. Not warnings, names. Paranormal investigators have recorded EVPs that sound like soldiers pleading, "Tell my wife, and don't let me die here." These voices rise and fall with the current, as if the river itself is speaking through them. The cornfield is worse. At dawn, men entered it alive. By mid-morning, nearly every stalk was cut down, by bullets, not wind. Survivors described the sound as constant tearing, like cloth being ripped endlessly. Today, when fog settles into the field, witnesses see shapes moving between the rows. Figures bend low, fall, stand again. Some visitors feel sudden pressure on their chests, struggling to breathe as if smoke fills their lungs. Others report the metallic taste of blood in their mouths, with no explanation. Then there is Bloody Lane. Originally a sunken road, it became a trench of death where bodies stacked so deep that the road vanished beneath them. Rain fell overnight, turning the road into a channel of diluted blood. People who stand there today report feeling dizzy, disoriented, overwhelmed by sudden despair. Some break down crying without knowing why. Others hear whispers right beside their ears, urgent, panicked voices telling them to lie down, to stay low, to survive. One investigator described seeing hands reaching out of the ground, not fully formed, but impressions pushing through the soil, fingers clawing upward before sinking back again. The climax of Antietam's haunting occurs at dusk. As the sun sets, the battlefield grows unnaturally still. Birds stop singing. Wind dies. The air thickens, pressing down on the chest. Then, slowly, the temperature drops. Witnesses describe seeing soldiers standing along the creek bank, soaked uniforms clinging to skeletal frames. Their faces are pale, eyes unfocused. They stare at the water as if waiting for something or someone. Then the whispers begin, soft at first, then overlapping. Hundreds of voices speaking at once. Names, prayers, final thoughts. And then silence. The figures fade. The pressure lifts. The river continues flowing as if nothing happened. But those who hear it say Antietam doesn't feel abandoned. It feels occupied, because this was not just a battlefield. It was a place where hope bled out in one day. And as horrific as Antietam is, there is one final place where death was not sudden, not quick, but slow enough for the fear to settle in permanently. a prison camp where men watch themselves fade away, and whatever remains there now doesn't want to be forgotten. Andersonville was never meant to be a battlefield, yet it became one of the deadliest places of the Civil War. Hidden in rural Georgia, this Confederate prison held tens of thousands of Union soldiers in conditions so brutal that survival itself felt like an accident. There were no walls to protect the men from the sun or the cold, no clean water, no mercy. Hunger hollowed them out. Disease spread unchecked, and hope disappeared long before life did. Men died slowly here, watching others fade beside them, until death felt like the only release left. What makes Andersonville different from other haunted sites is not violence, but endurance. Visitors today describe the land as unbearably heavy, as if grief itself settled into the soil and never moved on. The air feels thick, pressing against the chest. People report sudden weakness, unexplained nausea, and an overwhelming sadness that arrives without warning. It is not fear that dominates this place, it is exhaustion. As night falls, the atmosphere shifts. The temperature drops sharply, even in summer. Sounds seem muted, as if the land is holding its breath. Witnesses have reported seeing shadowy figures, crouched near the old creek bed, thin and motionless, as if still waiting for food that never comes. EVP recordings have captured faint whispers, not screams. Not anger, but quiet words like "so tired" and "still here." Paranormal researchers believe Andersonville does not replay moments of horror. Instead, it radiates memory, releasing the emotional residue of suffering that never found closure. The most chilling experiences occur in the center of the former prison grounds. At dusk, some visitors claim to see long, silent lines of men standing shoulder to shoulder, facing nowhere, their forms barely visible against the fading light. When approached, the pressure in the air intensifies. Breathing becomes difficult. Some say they can hear coughing, thousands of weak breaths overlapping, as if the ground itself is struggling to inhale. It feels less like witnessing ghosts, and more like stepping into a memory that refuses to end. Historians say Andersonville closed when the war ended, but those who have walked its grounds know better. Some places do not shut down. They simply stop being visible. Andersonville is not haunted because of what happened there. It is haunted because what happened there never truly stopped. Civil War battlefields are often called sacred ground, but sacred does not mean peaceful. It means remembered. These fields absorbed pain, fear, and desperation on a scale the human mind struggles to comprehend. And when suffering is repeated often enough, the land learns how to hold it. America was built on sacrifice and courage, but also on unimaginable loss. Places like Andersonville stand as proof that history does not always fade. Sometimes it stays, watching, waiting. If this story stayed with you, then you understand why these places matter. This channel exists to explore real American locations where history and horror intersect quietly, honestly, and without exaggeration. If you want more true stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Until then, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember some places are not meant to be revisited.